Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's Sensafili Sparring Partners webinar on Vodafone's power efficiency strategy. Our speakers today are Francesca Serravalle, Head of Infrastructure and Energy at Vodafone UK, Monica Paolini, Principal at Sensafili, and I'm Kendra Chamberlain, and I will be moderating our webinar today. In Sparring Partners webinars, we watch our speakers debate a topic live on video. We like to encourage our audience to participate in the conversation. So please share your comments and questions using the Q&A and chat functions of the Zoom bar. All comments are visible to all participants, so please keep the conversation polite and respectful. Our speakers will do their best to address topics or questions as they go along and as they become relevant to the topics being discussed. So please do not hold your questions until the end. With that, I'll hand it over to Monica.
Kendra, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank all of you for calling in. We know this is a time where there's so many events going on, and thanks to Francesca for joining us to talk about power efficiency. As some of you already might know, since I talk about it all the time, is that power efficiency, it's a really fascinating topic. Not only it's a very hot topic, but it's not trivial at all. It's really fascinating because it involves so much of so many aspects of running a network. And so I'm particularly happy to have Francesca talking to us today, because we were on a panel recently together, and she is really looking at the issue end to end. So she's not just looking at 20 little pieces, but how everything fits together. And she will tell us more. And this is a great opportunity for you to ask her questions as we go along. And as Kendra said, don't wait until the end for the questions, because we take them as we go along. So I don't want to take any more time and just go straight into this, and I would like Francesca to introduce herself. It's a pleasure to have another Italian here on Sparring Partners. Not that many of us. Well, actually, maybe there is quite a number. Anyway, Francesca, tell us who you are and what you're doing at Vodafone right now.
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me, Monica. I'm Francesca Serravalle. I'm Head of Infrastructure and Energy at Vodafone, and my key remit is to optimize, expand, and transform the infrastructure to deliver a green and cloud-native infrastructure in line with our telco cloud vision. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
Yes, so it's actually interesting that you're talking about this infrastructure and energy, which is because oftentimes people just do energy or infrastructure, and I think it's very interesting that you're putting them together and you're looking at all of them. So can you give us a sort of an initial overview of what is that you're doing at Vodafone, which I think it's very interesting and quite special.
Yeah. So basically for us, energy is really top of the agenda. And this is because it enables us to deliver a green network and hence to fulfill our ambition of net zero. But it's also helped us to control the OPEX in a very CAPEX intensive period where, we're driving very strategic program for network transformation. And this is why we're investing millions really in energy saving. And as you were saying, we're really having an holistic view. We look at opportunity in the access, in the aggregation, in the core, and then even vertical at the infrastructure level, the network and the service level. We're also looking at, both active and passive infrastructure. We're looking at the entire horizon, the short term to deliver in-year benefit, but also mid and long term to deliver more strategic program. And for us really to do so, to have this to drive this holistic view, we have created energy governance forum where really we help to enable cross collaboration across the entire organization, whether it's enterprise, the consumer, the IT, the operation, the network, the data center team, so that we use this platform as an ideation where we create a pipeline of energy saving initiative. And then, we help prioritizing those initiatives, as well as making sure that we have the right fund, the right resources, and they are deliverable in terms of feasibility. So this is in a nutshell what we are doing, and I'm happy then to go into details of what we are doing in the radio side, in the core side. Yeah.
Yeah, well, and I think that's interesting because, as you mentioned, you have to work in different parts of the organization. So I guess it's an additional driver to break down silos. You just have to, discover or find new ways or more, intensive way to work with each other within the company.
Yeah.
And that's always good. Now, one thing that I think that it's sort of like, and this is not a Vodafone specific question, is when you look at what we're trying to do in wireless, we're doing more and more, and the growth rate we have in terms of the amount of traffic we transport, it's really growing a lot. If you compare it, for instance, in transportation, where things are growing, but traffic is not growing at the same rate. So is it fair to ask mobile operators or any service provider to actually reduce consumption, or is it just we should just become more power efficient, but that might not result in power consumption decline?
Well, I think we have to look at both energy efficiency and energy consumption reduction. So, for example, to me, if I look at all the initiative, and if I want to really put in each bucket those initiatives, I would say for me, we reduce the energy consumption through, for example, optimizing topology, simplifying the network. So optimizing the topology and removing nodes that are redundant, or decommissioning a legacy platform, whether those are data platform, voice platform, transport platform as well, even reducing the IT tools that we have. So I mean, from a network side, we reduce platforms, but similar to the IT. And then I think it's really important that we accelerate migration from legacy to new ones, so that we don't have a double stack for IT and network for long. So this, to me, reduce the energy consumption, right? But how do we enable energy efficiency? We enable energy efficiency through maximizing the resources that we have, whether those are radio resources or core or transport resources. So, for example, if we use energy saving initiative where we or load balancing or traffic steering, where we dynamically steer traffic based, on user distribution, based on traffic condition, that to me, it fits into the energy efficiency. If we look at SDN as well, that we maximize the transport resources, again, through optimal routing and based on the SLA. This is another, power efficiency. So I would say we need to look at both. And obviously we try to reduce the energy consumption to decouple the growth of traffic with the energy consumption. And we are proud that in Vodafone we have been able to decouple, to break this equation and decouple them. But we also try and introduce as much intelligence as possible, as much software as possible, that help us to maximize the radio resource, the core resources, and the aggregation resources. And if we think even, take, for example, even traffic management or even, for example, zone, where we look at, we introduce the AI, for example, and we look at how we can forecast the traffic and then based on that parameterize, choose the best parameterization of network. I think those are the type of initiative that to me will fit into the power efficiency.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you mentioned the sort of the decommissioning, because it's actually expensive to remove stuff too. So it's obviously expensive to add new equipment, new infrastructure, but it's also expensive to remove it. And I guess in the past, it was just easier to just leave it there because the energy costs were sort of not really were not really a priority. I mean, clearly you always want to use less energy, but it was not as important as it's becoming now. Now, actually, before we go on, so sort of as with on this track, another way to sort of not save energy but improve the energy, the sustainability of the network is to use renewable sources of energy. How do you see that? Is that gonna, how helpful is that going to be?
Yeah, it's going to be very helpful. We are introducing photovoltaic solar panel into our core sites. We know that this will provide a certain percentage of our energy, and so for us this is those are multi-year program, of course, because they are not simple projects, and but we have in plan really to deploy photovoltaic panels in most of our core mobile sites. Yeah.
Yes, so I guess that will also help. So there are different ways to go about it. So there's no one solution.
No, as I say, if I'm just really, and probably it makes sense for me to mention a few initiatives that we're doing and go a bit more into details. But obviously there are things that are more low-hanging fruit, things that are multi-year program. But in the radio side, modernizing the radio hardware is going to be key. Introducing software feature like, cell dormancy, energy saving, where we can steer traffic and switch off some capacity layers based on the current load or in specific time of the day. We have a solution which is called Smart Sites, where through IoT, we enable IoT connectivity to most of our estates, access RBS, and that enable us to create a digital twin of our access layer, and that, it enables remote control, but also a lot of data like sites data get into our big data energy platform data, and will help us really to have more visibility on the energy consumption, and hence also opportunity for optimization. In the core sites, obviously, we are remodernizing cooling and battery as well, trying to use more efficient technology. But there is a lot happening in terms of decommissioning, as I say, SDH platform, closing some sites that we believe they are redundant, so create new topologies that are more linear, decentralizing as well, both the infrastructure, the network, and the services, and so on. Sorry, I think there is one question.
Yes, that's really, for you on solar modules.
Yeah, probably I wouldn't share the data, but we are planning to. I can't say much on this, but if you stay tuned, you will probably find out a bit more in the coming month. But yeah, we're doing that in our core sites. We're deploying.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing is to keep in mind is that the cost of those technologies is going down. So, for instance, a few years ago, solar was just it's too expensive compared to the cost of traditional energy. So I think that we will see more, not just because mobile operators are more willing to invest, but because it's going to become more affordable. And then you have better battery savings as well that should drive up.
But bear in mind that the payback is not really short time. So if in your business case you bring a short payback, then you won't have a successful business case. But you do it because you are committed to reduce scope 2 as well, because it helps the net zero ambitions and so on. So it's really, we have to look at other benefits and not just economic, and so it's really important to have maybe a longer payback. if you want to.
Especially since we're on the payback topic, clearly you have targets that you're trying to meet, for sustainability, but also there is a component of just plain cost savings, which are, sort of separate from the sustainability part, with the increasing cost of energy. So how important is the ROI, the sort of like you invest because that's going to lead you to a cost savings on the
yeah, I mean, yes. So when we look at all the energy saving initiative, I explained that we have this platform, this governance, this platform that is used to create a pipeline of initiative. Now, sometimes those initiatives, they don't require CapEx, but most of those actually, they are CapEx for OpEx saving, right? So there is a CapEx associated. And when we do the business case, obviously we do talk about, well, we spend some CapEx, how much OpEx we're going to save and how long does it take then to get the payback. But we also consider, is this initiative essential because, it also helps our net zero vision. So there are different criteria that we normally consider, but the economic part is also there. And we use this platform to really rank, the initiative based on the payback, but also based on the benefit that we could have a more strategic program, and so we will drive based on that ranking.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that there is another question, which is actually a very important topic that I wanted to ask you about, which is the virtualization. So the question from Jean is, as network functions are virtualized, how do you measure power consumption and energy efficient of virtual components? And I have to say that this is actually, it's a very good question because, first of all, it's energy consumption as separate from energy efficiency. They're two very different things. And actually, in measuring power consumption is probably more straightforward, but to measure efficiency is not straightforward at all, even if the element is not virtualized. So
yeah,
we can
comment I
on
think with virtualization. No, I think this is a great question, and there are a few variables to answer this question. So first of all, with virtualization, rather than using dedicated hardware for dedicated function, we're using, common hardware, COTS hardware that can host a different type of VNF and workload. It could be networking workload, or it could be, a virtualized core function for, either for data services, voice services. And I would say is that it really depends on how much workload is going to host and how much VNF you're going to instantiate in your in the NVI server, because the NVI server will of course be a more powerful server than a dedicated one. So I would say is that initially, as long as at a certain point, when we start instantiate more VNF, then the benefit of the energy saving as we maximize the hardware utilization is going to be beneficial, right? So there will be a cutoff point. But if we use a powerful NVI server for few VNF, then it will be more inefficient. What I would also say really depends on the VNF onboarding and how much those VNF are optimized in terms of hardware utilization. And probably as we move from VNF to containerized function and being able also to use the auto scaling capability, then we will see more of a benefit, I would say.
And so again, it's a sort of a long-term view. So it's a new approach that eventually will drive better efficiency. In the sense, it's not just how much the server consumes, but how much you also use it. And so it's so it's the two together. So you don't see. I guess that one way to look at it is that you don't look at power efficiency from the specifications only. It's how you use it, how you actually deploy it. If you have, and I guess that then the fact that you can have an infrastructure that is more centralized, where you can get pooling gains, maybe that's beneficial as well. So it's more than picking the right hardware. It's where you put it, how you put it.
It depends, as I mentioned, it depends on how much workload you will have on that server. It depends a lot on the VNF onboarding, and it depends on whether you can do auto-scaling, because eventually, compared to legacy, on the legacy, what we do, we dimension the network based on the worst case scenario. The benefit of the virtualization is that you can provision network resource and network function on demand based on a specific, real-time SLA demand. And this is where, the scaling up and down brings more efficiency, because we don't need to create a dimensional network for a worst case scenario. So definitely it's beneficial, but again, it really depends on how your VNF are optimized for a certain hardware and if you support auto-scaling.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that to me is like what really makes the topic much more fascinating, because it's not just picking the best hardware, is how you put it into the context of the network. However, we do have a question about the hardware part, and Andrea is asking, what is a Vodafone strategy on ARM processors having much lower consumption than traditional x86 architecture? How appealing they are to Vodafone's strategy? And I guess this is an interesting question on, also on how you go from general purpose to acceleration and, more dedicated and optimized chipsets.
Yeah, I'll have to come back on that, on the specific hardware, also because we are transitioning from one specific strategy to another one. So I would rather prefer to come back on this.
But I think that what's important to say here, regardless of the specific vendors,
yeah,
I think that this is something that it's interesting, and it is going to become more important as we move forward to look at, what are the benefits of different architectures. Because
this is
it is not just
performance, or edge-centric, let's say. So for us, we are going towards more of an edge-centric type of architecture, and more distributed. And that's because if you look on the, if we have let's say a top-down approach, and we look at the application, most of the application are going to be more distributed, right? Rather than having a full centralized. If you look at the AI as well, you may have the training of the algorithm centralized, but the enforcement distributed. Same for security and same for network. So network is becoming disaggregated, decentralized. So we're going to have more of an edge-centric architecture. Whether this will be beneficial or not, I think the industry is still debating on that, because on a way, we are introducing more hardware, right? But those are less powerful hardware. But on the other hand, we are also reducing the requirement that we have on the backbone, because we are processing the workload more on the edge. So I think to answer this question, we will need it's really topology dependent. Where is the edge? And where do you process the workload? And what is the business model behind the edge? Is it just to hosting networking, or to host some distributed cloud, some specific applications, so we consume the data in there? So it's really a very complex question, this one, that if it requires specific even understanding of the business model beyond the connectivity, really.
Yeah, and I guess that the answer will probably be different if you are, say, in a rural area versus urban or suburban, or even different areas depending on what kind of traffic, what kind of distribution you have, right? So
of course, because your deployment strategy, the deployment, if you look at the radio deployment and how much even with densifying, It really depends, on the user's distribution, on the traffic template for that specific region, and on the spectrum that we have. So it's really, I would say, is multi-function type of answer here in question.
Now, we have a question from Jean about power consumption. What is the ratio between fixed part and variable part? I'm not sure I understand it. Francesca, do you understand it? Or maybe Jean can give us more.
The variable, fixed part. The fixed part, it's, the run rate. It's the status of the network. The variable is the new deployment that we add, and the energy saving and the energy consumption that we take. So those are the two variables, the new deployment plus what we save from this energy saving initiative. And well, obviously, I wouldn't even have on top of my mind what is the ratio, but the biggest part, the fixed part, it's the run rate, right? Is what we have it today in our network. And yeah. But then there is always something incremental because, we're deploying new 5G sites, but we are trying to complement with energy saving initiative with removing the unnecessary, as I was saying, removing decommissioning, and trying to accelerate as much as possible the services from the old platform to new platform.
Now, I would like to go back to the Open RAN and disaggregation in a minute, but before we go there, that's a hot topic. But before we go there, I wanted to ask you. I forgot what was about to ask you. I forgot. Maybe we'll go talk about Open RAN.
Let's talk about it. You will,
my tongue, but anyway, so okay, why don't we talk about Open RAN then, and then we'll go to the
so Open RAN.
Sorry, I got it back.
Yeah.
Kind of related to the cost issue. So at Mobile World Congress, I went and talked to as many vendors as I could about, so what is your story? Where do you see the cost savings coming from? And pretty much all of them mentioned the sort of the ability to sleep, which is always going to be, always been there, but they've been introducing new features so you can get the equipment on and off at different levels in a more real-time way. And that seems to be a very good way to save power because you don't even need to basically do major changes. It's a software upgrade. Now, how important is it? So we don't want to talk about specific vendors here, but is it true that that's really the most important in terms of the amount of energy consumption?
It's very important. I mean, if we look at the initiative in core, fixed, and radio, and we can see that when we introduce some intelligence in the radio part, we save quite a lot. And that's because, that's where the most of the energy consumption comes. So any type of software or intelligence that help us either to steer some traffic to maybe in order for us to a certain layer so that we can switch off capacity layer, whether this is done statically, whether this is done dynamically, whether this one switch off just the frequency or even the digital part of it. I think we can see that the saving is quite high. I think this one is the top one. So any radio, let's say radio software, radio intelligence that help us to optimize the radio resources and to really based on the user distribution in a dynamic way. I think this is key. And obviously in this, having some sound capabilities, some platforms, some AI ML capability that takes data from the energy counters, from the load counters that has some either real-time analytics or time series analysis to enable to forecast the traffic and understand where we can steer the traffic and what we can switch off. I can tell this is very, very important, very, very important. And the other functionality that we feel it's another low-hanging fruit, and we're very proud because this is done in-house, it's our energy big data platform. So we have a platform which is built into the cloud, and we ingest data from our radio sites, as well as from our core sites, and those data are site configuration data, temperature data, billing data, and it really helps us to, first of all, visualize and monitor the energy of the radio estate, but also to create a heat map and understanding where there are some outliers, and then help with the field and operation to do root cause analysis. And we're very proud of this because, you know, we use all the data pipeline and the cloud services to help create MVP, ML algorithm MVP through our data scientist skills. And this really, you know, this is in line with enabling us to adopt agile methodologies and really be very reactive on business requirement, on operational requirement. So yeah, in fact, it helps us to really experiment and learn fast.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting because then you can put, you know, energy consumption and performance, quality of experience, everything together, so you can see the trade-offs there.
Exactly.
But let me ask before we move forward, you know, that I'm sure that has required a lot of effort on your end. So what did you decide to do it in-house? Is it, there were specific questions that you think are unique, or what's
well, you know, when it comes, you see, when it comes to energy big data platform, I can tell we have seen that the let's say the proposals or it's quite, the market is quite crowded, right? We have most of the cloud providers or the system integrators, or even, you know, the vendors, they all have a big data platform and an energy big data platform. So, but for us, because we, as part of our TechCo vision, we want to in-source those skills, development skills and data scientist skills that help us to respond quicker to market requirements and to customer requirements. It was really important to have that control, and so to build, you know, the architecture and the platform in a modular way, and also to give us the flexibility to plug in different use case, whether this one is, you know, the use case of monitoring the energy to create heat map, or to build up our budget, our OPEX budget as well. So I would, what I'm seeing instead, that what I see in the market, often there is a very verticalized approach. You have a platform built for a specific use case, and doesn't give flexibility. And then, you know, even the business model is, you know, that you will have to, they offer as a services their development capability to build a new dashboard, a new use case. And this is not in line with our vision to become more agile and, you know, build portal, platform and software capability that help us to be very reactive to new customer and market requirements.
Yes, no, absolutely. That's very important. Now, when we were talking about sleep and how you can use, you know, Son or AI to drive different sleep algorithms, clearly there is a benefit in terms of power. But how do you know that at some point, if you are too aggressive, you end up having a negative effect on the user experience? And maybe, you know, your network, I mean, any network is kind of limited by capacity, so you can never provide the absolute perfect user experience that everybody wants to have. It's just sort of like physics, right? So how do you go about it? You know, how do you go about maximizing power efficiency without creating a problem on quality of service?
Because I think the main reason for that is that for us, customer experience is key, right? So we want to use the network to deliver our services in the most reliable way. So we have a very customer-centric approach. And this is why when we brainstorm together, we only consider in the pipeline those ideas that they don't have any impact on the customer experience. And this is why we're looking either at ideas that simplify our network, so remove the unnecessary, so we know there is no impact at all to the customer experience, or optimize. So it's optimizing the resources, the radio resources or the transport resources through SDN. It won't have an effect on the customer experience. I think it's very difficult to say how do you maximize the optimization without impacting the QoS. But that's where the software intelligence comes in, right? That's where the AI, ML, the SON control, the SDN controller, where they know there is this intelligence where they correlate the information that you have from an application perspective, from the network, and you are able to create, really a customer-centric and a service-driven network. This is the role of the intelligence. Make sure that you optimize the resources, you deliver a green infrastructure, you deliver a most energy efficient network in line with the requirement that you have from the application and from the service layer. That's you need to take into account. So those two are correlated, and that's how we enable customer experience, because we correlate the services, we optimize the network parameterization based on the service requirement, using this intelligence in between.
So I guess that as you learn, as you go through the AI learning process, you can start being more gentle, and then you can try to go deeper and deeper and see what happens. I mean, not you just try out, but you can see how much you can take. So you don't have to start everything on day one.
It's a phased approach.
It's a learning process that you can go through. But at the same time, let's say you switch off a cell, you still, and from what I hear is like there is still oftentimes the ability to know if somebody wants to get online and do something. So it's not completely on and off. You get a way so that even if your infrastructure, all the main parts are off, there's still the ability to notice if somebody wants to get connected.
Of course.
So it's not completely off.
Yeah.
It's not lights are
it's
off.
very dynamic. Yeah, no. It's very dynamic. Yeah, that's what the intelligence layer is about.
Now, since we're talking about users and we have a question about it, so maybe you should go about it. And it's Amanda, and she's asking, how do you see the potential of involving customers, application providers, and users to work together to achieve overall energy efficiency instead of network operators and vendors doing it alone? I'm going to add something to this, because I think this is an important question, but also it opens a potential, I would say, issue. But so at Mobile World Congress, I was at a panel talking about efficiency, and somebody asked, what is the footprint of using Instagram or using something else? And so at some point, we also need to get to a point where, you don't want every time you're doing something to say, oh my God, how much power I'm using, because that's just not gonna really help. So we want people to encourage and feel good about using their connectivity. But so it is good to involve customers, but at the same time, you don't want to get into a situation where you say, oh, whatever you do, if you watch a video on YouTube, God knows how much energy, that's kind of pushing. I think it's pushing it too far.
It's not pushing hard, but something should be done, right? Because I remember once I saw a documentary that was telling the effect of, us taking so many pictures and how much is the storage of is the cost, the consumption of storing a simple picture into into the cloud. And if you scale it for all the users, that's a lot. I think we will need to do some more awareness, because I think that would help from a user perspective. I also think that as we go towards as we introduce 5G standalone, and then we can introduce network slicing, and through network slicing we can have logical network for specific applications. So really we can have that tight, very tight connection between the application and the network. That will also help to let's say to make even the network more application centric, but also more to reduce the unnecessary, let's say. We built what we need to build for that specific application.
Yeah, and I guess you point out an important issue. That is, one thing is the transport, I mean, the access and transport, and then the other one, it's the storage. So taking a picture, you need to transfer, but also you need to presumably store it. So I guess that those are two separate issues. But also, so for the access and transport, you can also, as you become more application aware, you can schedule traffic in different ways. So for instance, if you have an upload of a photograph, if you wait a little bit, you might be able to transfer at a time where the sort of the cost, so that the consumption is effectively lower because you have a lower load on the network, right? So
yeah, this is the role of traffic management system that we support, where you look at what the application that you have, you look at the network, and you maximize the configuration, you optimize the configuration at HTTP, and so on. You also maximizing the effectiveness of the scheduling as well, depending on the type of application. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's all sort of complementary. It's not like one erases the need of the other. So actually, yeah. And now the question also, part of the question, it was about application providers. And so some, for instance, are using different or more efficient or more effective way to compress video, but I'm sure there are different ways. So are you working, or do you see a role for application providers here? Even though, the thing is that they're not really, how can I say, they have no incentive in the same way they don't care about how much traffic they're generating, because they don't have
in general, I think there should be more synergy between the application and service provider, more in general, which we can do as much as we can through, introducing, transforming our network, making more application centric. But I would imagine that from a business perspective, not from a technical perspective, where we know what to do to optimize the network for certain application. We know how to do, and we do it well. But I think from a partnership perspective, there should be more synergy between the application providers, starting from, for example, doing some, as we go towards, SaaS model. Most of the applications now are offered as SaaS, right? And if you look, we're going towards, ecosystem type of proposition. So I think having partnership with the SaaS marketplace, with ISV, with application is key. And it could be simply a direct peering, a QoS differentiation, or some AI intelligence, or some traffic management. As I say, we know how to build the technical and operational synergy, but we need to build, those business synergy as well. I think that is key.
Yes. So why don't we go, because we're kind of getting close to run out of time, and I want to make sure we cover a few more topics. And one is Open RAN, and clearly Vodafone is highly committed to Open RAN. is that something that is going to be neutral with respect to power efficiency, helpful, or having a negative effect?
Yeah, I think this question comes up to every, it comes up to every panel on Open RAN. And I would say, to answer this question, we will need to have a more scaled deployment, right? But I also will say that as we are one of the key, let's say, sponsors and promoter of this initiative and technology, we are also working with the likes of Intel to introduce new capability that will enable better power efficiency, like, for example, some, again, intelligence that based on application we can change the CPU states. There is a white paper from Intel on this that we have also co-authored with them, but I was saying generally, really, it's still early. We're working on that. And there are some moving parts as well in terms of, depends on the deployment that we're talking about. Indoor deployment, outdoor deployment, rural deployment, dense urban area. I think, again, there are some moving parts and some variables to be able to answer this question. It's not just white or black.
Absolutely. How about REC? Is REC going to help in that context?
Yeah, REC, SON, they're going to help in the sense that they are going to, as I mentioned, to create that intelligence layer for which you can optimize and configure your radio resources or switch on and off capacity layer based on what the application is. The way REC and SON works is just help us really to maximize that synergy between what are the real-time SLA requirement and traffic requirement with the network parameters and optimization, the network resources. So I think that link will be key as well. But regardless of whether, please go ahead.
In another dimension, there's countless of them. We can go on for hours talking about different ones, but one is the different bands. So we're moving towards higher bands, from sub-6 gigahertz millimeter wave. What does that, how the selection of a band affect efficiency?
Yeah, this is related to deployment, right? Deployment strategy, and the deployment strategy is really driven by, the traffic requirement, the users, distribution, our, customer based, and also, as you say, the spectrum. But I would say most of the service provider have a type of hierarchical cell structure where you have, coverage layer and then different, and then you have different capacity layer. Now, I would say that spectrum is very key, spectrum holding, because we try as much as we can to optimize and maximize the macro sites, right? But obviously, densification will be very important to deliver the customer experience in dense urban area. And this, if you look at the debate that we're having today and for the 6 gigahertz, where, the Wi-Fi Alliance and telco have a different view. For us, it's really important that this is a licensed one, because it will eventually avoid mass densification, and trying to minimize the densification is key, because it will have a beneficial effect in terms of energy saving. Now, obviously, as I say, we will have a hierarchical cell structure. We will have capacity layer. And this is why it's very key to be able to dynamically switch on and off based on the traffic requirement and user distribution. This is how we solve. But again, I think a deployment strategy has many moving parts and many variables. I'll have to really go in a few minutes.
Yes. So maybe I can ask, there's a final question from the audience, and that's the energy efficient metric that you use. What do you use to compare Vodafone with its peers? Data throughput per unit of energy?
So we use per unit, I think internal or external? What is the question? Is it what we
I
use
guess
it
with
for?
other operators, but I would say that that's also a question when you have to pick a vendor. It's the same issue. It's like how do you compare vendors? How do you compare yourselves to others? So how do you measure power efficiency in different parts of your network? I mean, that's sort of like, I think it's a very general question.
Yeah, so what we do, we have a very bottom-up approach, right? So we get data from all our assets in the access, in the data centers, and in the network as well. And we use we are deploying smart meters everywhere so that we have very accurate energy data. And that's how we measure the energy consumption. For KPI for energy efficiency, I think we can look at, what NGMN they are proposing, where they look at either, the total energy consumption divided by number of customers that you have, or total energy consumption divided by the total throughput. So I guess it's really important that we use a harmonized approach, and that's why I think the role of NGMN to define standardized KPI is very key. So we have, a single source of truth for energy efficiency.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, just a very final question that we have from the audience, and I'll let you go. Milena from Orange, Europe. She's working on the same scope, and she asked whether your big data platform energy data is in-house. I believe it is, but my further question is, are you going to share it with other operators? Is something that you see as your own thing, and is just
no, it's our, I mean, this is why we built in-house. It's a modular architecture. We're using in-house skills and expertise. We have normally SME from our energy team. We have data scientists, and then we use an approach that help us to experiment fast through, ideating, getting in some sponsor from the business, finding an idea, and using this architecture, which is based on the cloud platform, and help us to really, let's say, very quickly create data pipeline and MVP, and for specific AI algorithm MVP to address a specific let's say, challenge. And through creating also very quickly a dashboard where we are able to prove whether, the value prop, the experiment is successful or not. We're also we're going towards, the world of software. We're using user story to help us validate in the value prop and the business case, and then understanding whether a certain experiment is fast or not. And we're very proud of this, innovation approach that is in line with, let's say, fail fast type of culture. We experiment, it works, perfect. It doesn't work, let's try another one. And that's why we want to do in-house skills and using the agility of cloud services as well.
Yeah. So, okay, Francesca, I'm going to let you go. Well, thank you so much for sharing all this with us. And I can be a few minutes. I can add a few comments and ask any questions that you guys might have. But Francesca, in the meantime, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you everyone for joining, and thank you for the very interactive session and all the questions that you asked. Thank you everyone.
Okay, thank you so much. And so I would like to add a couple of comments now before we go. And if you have any final questions, feel free to drop them. So one thing that I'm looking at as I'm working on a report now on energy efficiency, and every day really there is something new that comes up that makes you think, oh, that's something new we need to think about. And this is because traditionally in wireless, we have not really thought much about energy consumption. So if there was a, the easiest solution was to over-engineer, to over-provision. It was an easier way to make sure you had the quality of experience you wanted. And now that approach no longer works. And so we need to think about it, and that adds a new dimension, which is really interesting. But as Jean said, the problem with that, and the sort of why it's so interesting, but also not trivial and complex, is how do you measure efficiency? Because even if you measure data throughput per unit of energy, what do? You do the data throughput, the maximum, or the average? Is there such a thing as average? And like, let's say you deploy a 5G network. At the beginning, it might look like it's very inefficient because you have, relatively speaking, little traffic because people don't have 5G handsets yet. But then eventually that will change. So as the traffic load changes, that will change. But also the distribution of traffic through the day is going to have an impact on power efficiency. So just using the data throughput on an average for the day is not necessarily going to give you the real efficiency, given that you might be using different sleep algorithms and they have a different, they contribute differently to power efficiency depending on the load distribution. So this is all to say that, yes, we can have measures of power efficiency, but it's really hard to have one measure that captures it. And I mean, and I guess to some extent you can think about the throughput, but there you can say, well, the maximum throughput is this. And so in a way, it doesn't matter as much, but in this case, you really need to start thinking much more in a different way. And what is the most relevant measure for you? And I don't think that anybody has an answer. So it's very hard. And, even when I talk to vendors, it's very hard for vendors to compare different solutions that they offer or compare themselves to others in terms of understanding what is the power efficiency in the field and not just in their specifications. So we know what any piece of equipment would consume in terms of power. That's pretty straightforward, I believe, unless somebody tells me otherwise, and I would be happy to hear that. But when it gets into actual usage, what is that you're getting out of that amount of power in terms of services, it's a completely different and interesting, but it's really not trivial. And this is why, it's part of the reason why I got so interested in this. And so now a couple of words about the two next sparring partners on the topic. So we're going to have at least two. And the next one is on March 30th. And this is to look at private networks and IoT. And there, the sort of the power consumption might not be all that different, but we have to keep in mind that as we go into private networks and IoT, wireless can be a power, it's going to have hopefully a good impact on power efficiency in other sectors. Now, how do we think about it is an open question, but it's something we should think about as an industry, because we are going to enable increased efficiency in other segments of the economy. How should we think about it? It's something that I want to cover in the report, and we will talk about this with Mike Short. And I think it's really important to think about how we want to position, what is the message there. And then there will be another one in April about with DT Alex Troibel from the Oran Alliance will also be there. And we will talk specifically about Open RAN and power efficiency. And I think that the issue there is not, well, is Open RAN, but it's a more general issue of disaggregation. So if you disaggregate, there are basically two schools of thoughts here. Is if you have everything from the same vendor, you can optimize things better. On the other extreme, you can say if you have multiple vendors, you pick the elements that are more power efficient, and therefore you increase power efficiency. Where probably the truth is somewhere in the middle, or is not so clear cut, but I think it's really important. It's really interesting to think about those issues as we go, and clearly the path is towards disaggregation, is towards openness, but it's also at the same time helpful to think about what are the implications in terms of power, and how should we think about it in order to make sure that as we move to more disaggregated networks, we also increase power efficiency, and we don't, so that becomes part of the effort. We're at the top of the hour, so thank you all for listening in and for your questions, and I will hand it over to Kendra. Thanks a lot.
Okay, great. Thank you, Monica. That will conclude our webinar for today. A recorded version of the conversation will be available at the senseaffiliate.com website in the coming days for registrants. And thanks to our audience for those great questions and comments. As Monica mentioned, we have 2 upcoming sparring partners on energy efficiency. The next one is March 30th with Dr. Mike Short, and following that one, there'll be one on April 20th with Alex Choi and Gordon Witzel, and registration for all of those will be available at senseaffiliate.com. Thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.